Chapter 1. The door at the end of the world. The rain had been falling for 3 days when Alara Thorne finally reached the iron gate. She stood before it in the dark, her coat soaked through, her hair plastered to her cheeks. The manor loomed beyond the bars, tall, ancient, its windows black as shut-eyes. No light burned inside. No smoke rose from its chimneys. It looked like a place that had forgotten how to live, but she had nowhere else to go. Behind her lay the village that had cast her out. Behind her lay the ruins of her reputation, her engagement, her life. Thomas had seen to that. He'd whispered lies so skillfully that even her own family had turned their backs, unfaithful, unstable, unfit for decent society. She'd left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a single piece of advice from the innkeeper's daughter, delivered in a hushed voice behind the stables. If you need to disappear, go to Blackthorn Manor. He doesn't turn away the desperate no name. Just a pronoun wrapped in warning. Alara pushed the gate. It swung open without a sound, as if it had been waiting. The path to the manor was overgrown, brambles clawing at her skirts as she walked. The rain softened to mist. The air smelled of wet stone and something older, something that made her skin prickle. She climbed the steps to the massive front door, her hand trembling as she reached for the iron knocker shaped like a raven's head. She knocked once, twice. The sound echoed through the stone like a heartbeat. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. He stood in the doorway, tall and still as a statue. Dark hair fell past his shoulders. His face was angular, beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, dangerous, precise. His eyes were the color of smoke, and they looked at her without surprise, without warmth, without anything at all. You're bleeding, he said. Alara blinked. She looked down at her hands. Her palms were torn from scrambling over rocks during her flight from the village. Blood welled in thin lines across her skin. I didn't realize, she stammered. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Hunger, maybe. Or recognition. Come inside, he said. Before you attract worse things than me. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed that crossing this threshold would change her, that she would not return the same. But the rain was cold, and the village was behind her, and she had already lost everything that mattered. Alara stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The interior of Blackthorn Manor was dim, lit only by candles that burned without flickering. The air was warmer here, but not welcoming. The walls were lined with books and old tapestries that showed scenes of battles and feasts. Everything was pristine, untouched, as if time had stopped inside these walls. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. There was no fire. Alara sat. She watched as he moved to a cabinet and returned with a basin of water and strips of clean linen. He set them on the table beside her and knelt, taking her hand in his. His touch was cold, not the cold of winter, but the cold of marble, of things that had never known warmth. What's your name? She asked, her voice small. He didn't look up from her palm. Celine, I'm Alara. I know. She stiffened. How could you possibly? You knocked on my door, he said quietly, washing the blood from her hands with careful, methodical movements. That tells me everything I need to know. You're desperate. You're alone. You have no family coming for you, and no friends to shelter you. He paused, his thumb pressing gently against a cut. And you're willing to take shelter with a monster. You're not. I am, he interrupted. His eyes lifted to hers, and she saw the truth in them. Ancient, inhuman, other, but I'm a monster with rules. You're safe here, Alara Thorne, as long as you follow them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What rules? He wrapped the linen around her hands with practiced precision. No questions about what I am. No wandering at night. No leaving the manor until I say it's safe. He tied off the bandage. And no blood. Keep your wounds covered. Keep yourself whole. Why? Because blood calls to things in the dark, he said. And I am not the only predator in these woods. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Alara shivered, though the room was not cold. How long must I stay? She whispered. Celine stood, towering over her. In the candlelight, his shadow stretched across the floor like wings. Until the storm passes, he said. Or until you decide you'd rather face what's out there than what's in here. He turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps silent on the stone. There's a room at the top of the east wing, he called back, without looking. It's yours. Lock the door, if it makes you feel safer. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness at the top of the stairs. Alara sat alone in the candlelit hall, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. The manor was silent except for the rain against the windows. She thought of Thomas, of the village, of the life she'd lost. She thought of the cold touch of Seelan's hands and the hunger in his eyes, and she realized, with a strange, terrible clarity, that she was not afraid. She was curious. Rising from the chair, Alara climbed the stairs to find her room. The door was unlocked. Inside, a four-poster bed waited, made up with blankets that smelled of lavender. A single candle burned on the nightstand. She did not lock the door. Chapter 2. The habits of ghosts. Alara woke to silence, not the peaceful silence of morning, but the heavy, breathless silence of a world holding still. No birds sang. No wind stirred the curtains. The manor itself seemed to be waiting. She sat up slowly, her body aching from exhaustion and the previous day's flight. Pale light filtered through the window, not sunlight, but the gray glow of an overcast sky. The storm had passed, leaving behind a mist that clung to the grounds like a shroud. Her bandaged hands throbbed. She unwrapped them carefully, examining the cuts. They were already healing, the edges clean. Someone had washed them well. Seelan. The memory of his cold fingers against her skin made her shiver. She dressed in the same clothes from yesterday. She had nothing else and ventured into the corridor. The east wing was lined with closed doors, each one identical. She walked slowly, listening, but heard nothing. The manor was enormous, and she was utterly alone in it, or so she thought. When she reached the main hall, she found a tray waiting on the table near the fireplace. Bread, still warm, cheese, a bowl of berries that looked freshly picked, a pot of tea steaming gently, but no sign of who had left it. Seelan? She called, her voice echoing against the stone. And no answer. She ate slowly, her eyes scanning the room. The books on the shelves were old, their spines cracked and faded. The tapestries showed scenes she didn't recognize, great houses with banners bearing symbols she'd never seen, a court of figures in dark robes, a woman kneeling before a chalice of blood. She looked away quickly. After eating, she explored. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one meticulously maintained but utterly empty. The library held thousands of volumes in languages she couldn't read. The drawing room had instruments covered in dust sheets. The conservatory was filled with night-blooming flowers that should have been dead in this season. Everywhere she went, she found signs of life and no living thing. It was late afternoon when she finally saw him. Seelan stood in the corridor near the west wing, perfectly still, staring at a portrait on the wall. He wore black, as he had the night before, and his hair was tied back with a leather cord. He looked like he'd been carved from shadow. "You're awake," he said, without turning. "I've been awake for hours," Alara replied, approaching cautiously. "Where were you?" "Sleeping." "In the middle of the day?" His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "I prefer the night." She stopped beside him and looked at the portrait. It showed a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, wearing a gown of deep crimson. Behind her stood a man who could have been Seelan's twin. "Who is she?" Alara asked. "Someone who made a choice," Seelan said quietly. "And paid for it." He turned and walked away before she could ask more. Alara followed him down the corridor, frustration building in her chest. "You said I was safe here, but you won't tell me why I need safety. You won't tell me what you are. You won't." "I told you the rules," Seelan interrupted, stopping so abruptly she nearly collided with him. He turned, and his eyes were sharp. "No questions about what I am. That's not fair." "Fair?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You knocked on the door of a monster's house and asked for shelter. Fairness ended the moment you crossed my threshold. Then why did you let me in?" The question hung between them like smoke. Seelan's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded passing across his face before he locked it away. "Because I remember what it's like to have nowhere else to go." He turned and continued walking. This time, Alara didn't follow. She stood in the corridor, her heart pounding, watching his shadow disappear around the corner. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the manor, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through cracks in the stone, and something else. Footsteps, soft and measured, pacing the corridor outside her room, back and forth. Back and forth. She rose and cracked open the door. Seelan stood in the hallway, his back to her, staring out the window at the end of the corridor. The moonlight painted him in shades of silver and black. He looked like a ghost. "Can't you sleep either?" she asked softly. He went still. "I don't sleep at night." "Then what do you do?" "I wait." For what? He was silent for a long moment. Then, for the sun, Alara stepped into the corridor, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You said you preferred the night. I do. His voice was barely a whisper. But preference and prison are different things. She moved closer, studying his profile. In the moonlight, she could see how beautiful he was and how tired. Not physically. Something deeper. A weariness that had nothing to do with the body. How long have you been here? She asked. Too long. Alone? He turned to face her, and his eyes were full of something she recognized. Loneliness. The kind that had roots, that grew in the dark places of the soul. Yes, he said simply. Alara's chest tightened. She thought of her own isolation, the village that had turned against her, the family that had looked away. She thought of the nights she'd spent alone in her room, wondering if anyone would notice if she disappeared. I understand, she whispered. Seelan's expression softened, just barely. Do you? I was alone long before I came here, she said. At least you have a reason for it. I was alone in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. Something shifted in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. Or sympathy. Go back to bed, Alara, he said gently. The night is no place for you. It seems to be the only place for you. That's why you should go. But she didn't move. Instead, she stood beside him at the window, looking out at the mist-shrouded grounds. They stood in silence, two solitary figures in an empty house, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Alara didn't feel quite so alone. After a while, Seelan spoke again. Thank you. For what? For not being afraid. She looked at him, surprised. Should I be? His smile was sad. Most people are. I'm not most people, Alara said. No, Seelan agreed quietly. You're not. Chapter 3. The things he doesn't say. 3 days passed like a held breath. Alara fell into the rhythm of Blackthorn Manor, a rhythm that belonged to shadows and silence. She woke to find breakfast waiting. She spent her days exploring rooms that seemed to multiply when she wasn't looking. And every night, she found Seelan in the corridors, pacing like a caged wolf. They didn't speak much. But she noticed things. She noticed that he never ate. That he moved without sound, appearing and disappearing like smoke. That he avoided the eastern windows, where morning light would eventually break through. That he kept the heavy drapes drawn in every room. Even during the day, she noticed the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, not with hunger, but with something closer to wonder. As if he'd forgotten what it meant to have another living soul in his house. And she noticed the portraits. They were everywhere. Hung in corridors and chambers throughout the manor. Always the same subjects. Noble houses, ancient courts, men and women in dark finery. And in several of them, partially hidden in the background, she saw him, Seelan, unchanged, unaged. On the 4th morning, she found him in the library. He sat in a leather chair near the window, a book open in his lap, but his eyes were fixed on the fog beyond the glass. He looked carved from marble, beautiful and cold and completely still. You're in the portraits, Alara said from the doorway. He didn't startle. I wondered when you'd notice. How old are you? Old enough to know better than to answer that question. She crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite him. You said no questions about what you are. You didn't say I couldn't ask who you are. Seelan's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Clever. So, he closed the book and set it aside. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if deciding how much truth she could bear. I was born in 1643, he said finally. In a world you wouldn't recognize. I was the 3rd son of a minor lord, which meant I was worth nothing and expected even less. He paused. When the plague came to our village, it took everyone. My family, my neighbors, everyone but me. Why not you? Because I was already dying of something else, he said quietly. And she found me useful. She? The vampire who made me what I am. His voice was flat, emotionless. Lady Morgaine of House Nightborn. She needed soldiers for a war between the houses, and I was desperate enough to say yes when she offered me a choice, die human, or live forever as something else. Alara's breath caught. The houses. The portraits, those are vampire courts? Were. Seelan corrected. Most of them fell centuries ago. Wars, betrayals, the slow rot of immortality. House Nightborn was one of the last to stand, and even it crumbled eventually. He looked away. I walked away before the end. I'd had enough of blood oaths and power games. And you came here? I came here to disappear. She leaned forward. How long ago? 70 years. Give or take. 70 years. Alone in this manor, pacing empty corridors, waiting for a son he could never see. That's not living, Alara whispered. That's just existing. Seelan's eyes met hers, and she saw the truth in them, the hollow ache of centuries spent watching the world change while he remained frozen. Yes, he said simply. The word hung between them like a confession. Alara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the mist. Why did you really let me in, Seelan? I told you no, she interrupted. You said you remember what it's like to have nowhere to go. But that's not all of it, is it? Silence. Then so quietly she almost missed it. You reminded me of someone. Who? Someone I failed to save a very long time ago. Alara turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, but his hands gripped the arms of the chair like he was holding himself in place. I'm not her, Alara said gently. I know. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. Which is why you need to leave. Soon. Before what? Before they find you. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alara's pulse quickened. Who? Seelan moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the gray light. House Corvin. They've been hunting in the region for weeks. I've kept them away from the manor, but it's only a matter of time before they realize I'm sheltering someone. Why would they care about me? Because you're human. Because your blood is warm and clean and unmarked. His voice was tight, controlled. To them, you're prey, or worse, a tool. They'll use you to draw me out, or they'll take you for themselves. Fear coiled in Alar's stomach. Can't you protect me? Not if they come in numbers. He turned to face her, and his eyes were fierce. I'm strong, Alara, but I'm one vampire against an entire house. If they decide you're worth taking, I can't stop them all. Then teach me, she said suddenly. What? Teach me how to protect myself. Teach me your rules, your laws, whatever I need to know to survive in your world. Seelan stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. You don't want to learn those things. I want to live, Alara said firmly. And I'm tired of being helpless. I was helpless in the village when Thomas destroyed my life. I was helpless when my family turned me away. I won't be helpless here. Something shifted in Seelan's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. If I teach you, he said slowly, you'll see things you can't unsee. You'll know things that will change how you view the world. I already know monsters wear human faces, Alara replied. At least you're honest about what you are. For the first time since she'd met him, Seelan smiled. Really smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost mortal. All right, he said. Lesson 1 begins tonight. What's lesson 1? His smile turned sharp, showing the barest hint of fangs. How to tell the difference between a vampire who's hunting and one who's starving. Chapter 4. Blood and Bargains. Night fell like a curtain, and the manor came alive. Not with sound. Blackthorn was still silent as a tomb, but with presence. Alara felt it the moment the sun disappeared below the horizon. The air grew sharper, colder. The shadows deepened. And Seelan changed. He moved differently in the dark. Faster, more fluid. His eyes caught the candlelight and reflected it back like a cat's. When he spoke, she could see his fangs clearly, not threatening, just there. A reminder of what he was. They stood in the grand hall, facing each other across the stone floor. First rule, Seelan said, circling her slowly. Eye contact. A hunting vampire won't meet your gaze directly. They're tracking your pulse, your breath, the movement of blood under your skin. A starving vampire can't look away. Their control is gone. They're all instinct. Alara turned with him, keeping him in sight. And you? I look at your eyes, he said. Because I'm neither hunting nor starving. I'm in control. Are you always? He stopped moving. No, the honesty of it struck her. She'd expected deflection, reassurance. Instead, he gave her truth. When was the last time you fed? She asked. 6 days ago. Before you arrived. That's a long time? For some. He resumed his pacing. Vampires don't need to feed every day. Once a week is sustainable. Once a month is survival. Beyond that, he trailed off. What? Beyond that, you become the thing humans tell stories about. The monster in the dark who takes without asking. Alara watched him move through the candlelight, graceful and predatory. You've never taken without asking. It wasn't a question. No, Seelan said quietly. It's the one rule I've never broken. The one thing that separates me from what Morgaine tried to make me. What did she try to make you? A weapon. His voice went hard. House Nightborn didn't believe in consent. They believed in power, in dominance, in taking what they wanted because they were stronger, faster, eternal. He stopped and faced her. I spent 200 years as that kind of vampire before I realized I was becoming something I hated. So you left. So I left. He gestured around the empty hall. And I built a prison of better rules. Alar moved closer to him. These don't feel like prison rules. No? Prison rules would keep you safe from temptation. These rules keep others safe from you. She paused. That's different. That's choosing to be good when you don't have to be. Seelan looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You see too much. Maybe you don't see enough. Before he could respond, a sound cut through the night, sharp, distant, familiar. Wolves howling. But not quite wolves. The sound was too intelligent to deliberate. Seelan's entire body went rigid. Get upstairs. Now. What now, Alara? The command in his voice sent her running. She fled up the stairs, her heart hammering, and stopped at the landing to look back. Seelan stood in the center of the hall, his head tilted, listening. Then he moved to the window and looked out into the darkness. They're here, he said softly. Who? House Corvin. Terror spiked through her. How many? 3, maybe 4. He turned to her, and his eyes were no longer gray, they were black, pupils blown wide. Stay in your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I come for you. Seelan, if I don't come back, he continued, his voice steady despite the darkness in his eyes, there's a passage behind the bookshelf in the library. It leads to the forest. Run south until you reach the river, then follow it west to the village of Ashford. Tell them you escaped from Blackthorn. They'll help you. I'm not leaving you, Alara said. You don't have a choice. The howling came again, closer now. Just beyond the gates. Seelan moved to the door with inhuman speed. Lock the door. Then he was gone, vanishing into the night like smoke. Alara stood frozen on the landing, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to do as he said. But something else held her in place, something stubborn and reckless and entirely human. She thought of his loneliness, his 70 years of self-imposed isolation, the way he'd looked at her when she said he was choosing to be good. She thought, I won't let him face them alone. Instead of going to her room, Alara ran to the library. She pulled books from the shelf frantically until she found the mechanism, a leather-bound volume that clicked when she pulled it. The bookshelf swung inward, revealing a dark passage, but she didn't run. She searched the library for anything that could be a weapon. A letter opener, a heavy candlestick, a fire poker from the cold hearth. Her hands closed around the poker, and she ran back toward the front of the manor. Outside, she heard voices, cold, mocking, cruel. Come out, Nightborn. We know you're here. Hiding in your little fortress won't save you forever. The girl's blood sang through the forest. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Alara's stomach dropped. Her blood, her cuts from 4 days ago. She'd led them here. She crept to the window and looked out. 3 figures stood beyond the gate. They wore dark clothes and moved with the same predatory grace as Seelan, but there was nothing controlled about them. They looked hungry, feral. Their eyes gleamed red in the darkness, and Seelan stood between them and the manor. Alone. She's under my protection, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the night. Turn back, or answer to me. The tallest vampire laughed. You, one broken exile against 3 of House Corvin? You barely survived the last war, Nightborn. What makes you think you'll survive this? Because I have something you don't, Seelan replied. What's that? Something worth protecting. The words hit Alara like a physical blow. He was talking about her. The vampires attacked. They moved faster than her eyes could follow, blurs of shadow and violence. Seelan met them with equal speed, his movements precise and lethal. But he was outnumbered, and they knew it. One of them broke away from the fight and rushed toward the manor, toward the door, toward her. Alara gripped the fire poker and stepped back from the window. Her breath coming in sharp gasps. The front door exploded inward. Chapter 5. The taste of defiance. The vampire that crossed the threshold was female, lean and pale as moonlight, with eyes like rubies and a smile that promised pain. There you are, she purred, stalking forward. The little songbird whose blood called us here. Alara backed toward the stairs, the fire poker clutched in both hands. Her mind raced. Seelan had said vampires were faster, stronger, eternal. What could she possibly do against that? Then she remembered. She teaches him hope. She wasn't supposed to win. She was supposed to survive. Stay back, Alara warned, raising the poker. The vampire laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you're adorable. Do you really think that will?" Elara didn't let her finish. She grabbed the candelabra from the hall table with her free hand and hurled it at the vampire's face. The vampire dodged easily, but it bought Elara precious seconds. She ran not up the stairs where she'd be trapped, but toward the library, toward the passage, toward escape. The vampire was on her in an instant, impossibly fast, slamming her against the wall. The poker clattered to the floor. Cold fingers wrapped around Elara's throat, lifting her off her feet. Celine was always too sentimental, the vampire hissed, leaning close. Her breath smelled like copper and rot. He could have been great in the old courts. Instead, he plays house with his little pets until we put them down. Elara couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across her vision. Her hands scrabbled uselessly against the vampire's iron grip. Then, through the window, she saw at the first pale hint of dawn touching the eastern horizon. With the last of her strength, Elara grabbed the heavy drape beside her and yanked. The fabric tore free from its rod, and early morning light flooded the hallway. The vampire shrieked and released her, stumbling backward. Where the light touched her skin, smoke rose. Not flames, but the promise of them, a warning. Elara collapsed to the floor, gasping, as the vampire fled back toward the door. Hissing curses. Outside she heard Celine's voice, sharp with command. "Elara." She crawled toward the entrance. Her throat throbbed, her vision swam. But she was alive. Celine appeared in the doorway, his clothes torn, blood not his own splattered across his chest. Behind him, two bodies lay motionless on the ground. The female vampire who'd attacked Elara stood beside her remaining companion, both of them retreating toward the tree line where shadows still offered sanctuary. "This isn't over, Nightborn," the male vampire snarled. "House Corvin doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. Then tell your house to send better hunters," Celine replied coldly. The vampires disappeared into the forest, and Celine was beside Elara in an instant, lifting her with impossible gentleness. "I told you to lock the door," he said, but his voice shook. "I don't take orders well," Elara whispered hoarsely. He carried her to the chair by the dead fireplace and set her down carefully. His hands moved to her throat, examining the bruises already forming. When his fingers touched her skin, they trembled. "You could have been killed," he said. "So could you. I'm already dead. You know what I mean." Elara caught his hand, stopping his inspection. "There were 3 of them, Celine. You couldn't fight them all and protect the manor. I had to do something. You had to survive," he corrected sharply. "That's all. Not fight. Not sacrifice yourself. Just survive." "I did survive." She squeezed his hand. "Because you taught me to think like you do. To see the weakness. The dawn," he said quietly, realization dawning in his eyes. "The dawn," she confirmed. "You avoid eastern windows. You keep the drapes drawn. You sleep during the day." "I just made an educated guess." For a long moment, Celine stared at her. Then, impossibly, he laughed, a real laugh, rough from disuse but genuine. "You use sunlight as a weapon against a vampire," he said, shaking his head. "That's either brilliant or insane. Can it be both?" His smile faded, replaced by something more intense. He was still holding her hand, she realized. His thumb traced the pulse point at her wrist, not threatening, just aware. "You're bleeding again," he said softly. Elara looked down. Her palms were torn open from when she'd fallen, fresh blood welling in the cuts. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, trying to pull away. "I'll cover them." Don't." His grip tightened slightly, keeping her hand in place. "Don't apologize. Don't hide. But you said blood calls to things. That I should keep myself whole." "I lied." His voice was barely a whisper. "Blood doesn't call to things in the forest. It calls to me." Elara's breath caught. "Then why?" "Because I didn't want you to be afraid of me," Celine said. "I didn't want you to know how hard it is to be near you. How your heartbeat sounds like thunder in my ears. How your blood smells like summer wine." He looked up, and his eyes were black again, but not with violence. With hunger. And with control. "How much I want to taste you and how much more I want you to trust me not to." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Elara should have been terrified. Every instinct should have told her to run. But instead, she felt something else entirely, a strange, reckless courage born of exhaustion and adrenaline, and something deeper she couldn't name. "What if I did?" she asked quietly. Celine went utterly still. "Did what?" "Trust you." His expression shifted through a dozen emotions: shock, longing, fear, hope. Elara, you've had 100 chances to hurt me, she continued. You've been starving yourself for days because I'm here. You fought 3 vampires to protect me. You're shaking right now because you're trying so hard not to frighten me. She leaned forward. I trust you, Celine. You shouldn't. Maybe not. She smiled slightly, though her throat ached. But I do anyway. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Celine carefully, reverently lifted her bleeding palm to his lips. May I? He whispered. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what he was asking. She knew what it meant. Yes, she breathed. His tongue touched her blood, and his eyes closed. Chapter 6. The weight of eternity. The moment his tongue touched her blood, everything changed. Celine's entire body tensed. His eyes remained closed, but Elara saw his expression shift: relief, hunger, something like pain. His lips pressed against her palm, gentle despite the monster beneath the skin. She should have been afraid. She should have pulled away. Instead, she watched him with fascination. He took only a few drops, his movements careful and controlled. Then he pulled back, releasing her hand, his breathing unsteady. When he opened his eyes, they were still black, but clearer somehow, more present. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. Elara cradled her hand against her chest. The cuts had stopped bleeding. Does it help? More than you know. He stood abruptly and moved to the window, putting distance between them. His shoulders were rigid. But that can't happen again. Why not? Because blood creates bonds, Celine said, without turning. Especially willing blood. Especially blood given in trust. He gripped the window frame. Every time I taste you, the bond grows stronger. And bonds are dangerous, Elara. They're how the old houses controlled their servants. How they built armies of the enthralled. Fear prickled down her spine. You mean I could become no, he said quickly, turning to face her. Not like that. I would never take enough to enthrall you. But the bond works both ways. You would feel me, my hunger, my emotions, my presence. And I would feel you, your fear, your pain, your heartbeat, like it was my own. That doesn't sound terrible. It is when one of us is immortal and the other isn't. His voice turned hard. I've watched people I cared about grow old and die, Elara. I've felt their lives slip away like water through my fingers. I won't do that again. I won't bind myself to someone I'm going to lose. The words hit her like a blow. You're already bound to me, she said quietly. You've fought for me. You've sheltered me. You've shown me more kindness in a week than anyone has in years. That's different, is it? She stood, ignoring the ache in her throat. You said I reminded you of someone you failed to save. Who is she? Celine's expression shuddered. That's not who is she, Celine. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then finally, her name was Isabel. Elara waited, not pushing, just listening. She was human. Celine continued, his voice distant. A servant in House Nightborn's court. She brought me books when I was first turned, when I was still learning what I'd become. She wasn't afraid of me. She saw past the monster to the man who was drowning beneath it. You loved her. I cared for her, he corrected. But I was young, stupid. I thought I could protect her in that place. I thought my status as Morgan's favorite would keep her safe. His hands clenched into fists. I was wrong. When the war with House Duskborn began, Morgane needed leverage. She needed to prove that her vampires were loyal above all else. So she gave us a choice: feed from the humans we cared about until they died, or be executed for treason. Elara's hand flew to her mouth. No, most of the court chose to live, Celine said flatly. They drained their lovers, their friends, their servants. They proved their loyalty with blood. He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. I chose differently. I refused. And Morgane had Isabel killed anyway, slowly, publicly, while I was chained and forced to watch. A lesson, she said, about the cost of sentiment. Tears burned in Elara's eyes. I'm so sorry. I escaped that night, Celine continued. Killed 3 guards and ran. I've been running ever since. From the houses. From their rules. From the memory of her screaming while I did nothing. His voice broke. So no, Elara, I won't create another bond. I won't care for someone I can't save. She crossed the room before she could think better of it, and took his hands in hers. They were cold, trembling slightly. You already saved me, she said. 3 times in one night. And I'm still here, for now. Then let for now be enough. She squeezed his hands. You've spent 70 years punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. How much longer are you going to live? In that moment, Seelan looked at their joined hands like he didn't quite believe they were real. I don't know how to do anything else. Then learn, Alara said simply. You taught me to see vampires clearly. Let me teach you to see yourself clearly. You're not the vampire who stood by while someone died. You're the one who faces 3 enemies alone to protect a stranger. You're the one who starves himself rather than take without asking. You're the one who still believes in rules when the world you knew is gone. You make me sound noble. You are noble, she smiled sadly. You're just too broken to see it. For a long moment, they stood together in the gray morning light, the manor silent around them. Outside, the mist was burning off, revealing the overgrown grounds. Finally, Seelan spoke. They'll come back, you know. House Corvin. We killed 2 of theirs. That's a blood debt in their eyes. How long do we have? Days. Maybe a week. They'll send more this time. An entire hunting party. Can we survive that? No, he said honestly. Not if you stay here. Alara's heart sank. You're sending me away. I'm giving you a choice. He met her eyes. You can leave. Go to Ashford. Start over. Somewhere they'll never find you. Or you can stay, and I'll teach you everything I know about surviving in a world full of monsters. But if you stay, Alara, there's no going back. You'll be part of this, the blood, the violence, the eternal night. And eventually, you'll have to choose whether you want to walk in it forever or watch it from the outside while everyone you love disappears into the dark. That's not a choice, she whispered. That's a warning. It's both. She thought of the village that had cast her out, the family who had turned away, the life she'd lost and couldn't reclaim. She thought of Seelan standing alone in the corridor, waiting for a son he'd never see. I'm staying, she said. His eyes widened. Alara, I'm staying, she repeated firmly. And you're going to teach me how to fight, how to survive, how to face House Corvin when they come back. She lifted her chin. Because I'm done running from monsters. It's time I learned how to stand against them. Chapter 7. Lessons in Darkness training began that night. Seelan took her to the East Wing, to a chamber she hadn't discovered in her explorations. It was vast and empty, the stone floor marked with old scars, blade marks, burn marks, the telltale signs of violence. This was the sparring room, he explained, lighting candles along the walls. When House Nightborn held court here, before I claimed it for myself, we trained here, fought here, learned to kill here. Alara walked the perimeter, her footsteps echoing. You brought the other houses here? Once, a long time ago. He removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. Before I understood that immortality and politics make terrible companions, and now you're going to teach me what you learned. No, Seelan corrected. I'm going to teach you what I wish I'd known. The difference between surviving and living, between power and control. He gestured for her to join him in the center of the room. First lesson. You can't outrun a vampire. You can't overpower one. Your only advantage is that we're predictable. Predictable how? We're apex predators, he said. We've been at the top of the food chain so long that we've forgotten how to expect resistance. Most humans freeze, run, or beg. We don't expect them to fight smart. Alara thought of the female vampire, of the torn drape and sudden sunlight. Like using the dawn. Exactly. Seelan began to circle her slowly. Vampires have rules we can't break. We burn in sunlight. We must be invited into private homes. We can't cross running water. We need blood to survive. Every rule is a weakness if you know how to exploit it. What about the invitation rule? Alara asked, turning to keep him in sight. You said the female vampire crossed your threshold. Blackthorn Manor isn't a home, Seelan said. It's a fortress, a neutral ground. The invitation rule only applies to places of sanctuary homes where humans sleep, live, build their lives. This place stopped being a home the moment I stopped pretending to be human. The sadness in his voice made her chest ache. Teach me the rest, she said quietly. For the next 3 hours, Seelan taught her vampire lore like other men might teach geography. He explained the hierarchy of houses: Nightborn, Corvin, Duskborn, Crimson, and a dozen others, now fallen to war and time. He taught her about blood oaths, ancient compacts that bound vampires to their word. He explained the night courts, where disputes were settled and alliances forged under laws older than nations. House Corvin specializes in the hunt, he said. They're trackers, relentless and proud. When they mark prey, they don't stop until they've claimed it. That's why they'll come back. You drew their attention, and now you're a point of pride. How do I stop being prey? You can't. His eyes met hers. But you can become something more dangerous than prey. You can become bait. Alara's pulse quickened. You want to use me to draw them out. I want to end this before they bring reinforcements. We can't survive. Seelan moved closer. But that means putting you in danger. Real danger. And I need to know you can handle yourself when the moment comes. Then teach me. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Show me your stance. Alara positioned herself the way she'd seen fighters stand in the village square feet apart, hands raised. Seelan adjusted her immediately, his hands cool against her arms as he shifted her weight, angled her shoulders. You're too tense. Fighting a vampire isn't about strength, it's about momentum. You use our speed against us, our arrogance, our certainty that we'll win. He stepped back and without warning, moved toward her in a blur. Instinct took over. Alara dropped and rolled, exactly as she'd done when the female vampire attacked. She came up behind him, grabbing the candlestick from the wall and swinging it at where his head had been. But he was already gone, reappearing across the room. Good, he said, approval in his voice. You didn't freeze, didn't hesitate. That's the difference between survivors and victims. They continued through the night. He taught her where vampires were vulnerable: the throat, the heart, the spine. He taught her that iron burned vampire skin, that blessed silver was a legend, that fire was the only thing they truly feared besides the sun. What about stakes through the heart? Alara asked, breathless from dodging his attacks. Works, Seelan confirmed. But you need force behind it, strength. Most humans can't drive a stake through a vampire's ribs before we tear their throat out. He paused. Unless we're distracted. By what? His expression turned carefully neutral. Blood, hunger, desire. Any strong emotion can make us lose focus. It's the weakness of having everything we feel amplified by immortality. Alara wiped sweat from her forehead. Have you ever lost focus? Yes. When? He was silent for too long. Then? When you let me taste your blood. For those few seconds, I felt nothing but you, your pulse, your trust, your warmth. Everything else disappeared. If an enemy had attacked in that moment, I would have been defenseless. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. That's why you won't do it again, Alara said quietly. Not because of the bond, because it makes you vulnerable. Both, Seelan admitted. The bond and the vulnerability, they're connected. The more I taste you, the more I want. The more I want, the less control I have. And control is the only thing keeping me from becoming what I was. Alara moved closer to him, ignoring the warning in his eyes. What if I don't want you to be in control all the time? Alara, what if I want you to feel something other than loneliness and guilt? She reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cold cheek. You're so busy protecting me from yourself that you've forgotten I chose to stay. I chose this. I chose you. Seelan's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his face. You don't know what you're choosing. Then show me, she whispered. For a heartbeat. He didn't move. Then he pulled her hand away, but gently, as if it cost him everything. Not yet, he said, his voice rough. Not until I know I can keep you safe. Not until I'm certain I won't lose you the way I lost her. I'm not Isabel. No. Seelan agreed. You're braver, stronger, more reckless. He smiled sadly. Which terrifies me more than any vampire ever could. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the night, a howl, distant but clear. Seelan's expression went cold. They're back, already? They brought friends. He moved to the window and looked out at the forest. I count 6, maybe 7. Alara's stomach dropped. What do we do? Seelan turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the vampire he'd once been: the soldier, the warrior, the survivor. We make them regret coming here, he said. Chapter 8. The siege of Blackthornthe had less than an hour. Seelan moved through the manor with military precision, barricading doors, positioning weapons, preparing the fortress for siege. Alara followed, her heart hammering, but her hands steady. The eastern wall has the most windows, he said, handing her a bundle of iron chains. Hang these across the frames. They won't stop vampires from entering, but iron burns. It'll slow them down. What about you? I'll fortify the west wing. That's where they'll hit first. It's the weakest entry point. He paused, meeting her eyes. If they breach the manor, you run to the library. The passage. I'm not running. Alara, we discussed this, she said firmly. I'm done running. We stand together or we fall together. Something fierce and terrified flashed across his face. Then he grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close. Listen to me. If something happens to me, if I fall, you have to leave. Promise me. Seelan, promise me, he insisted, his voice breaking. I can survive things that would kill you 100 times over. But if you die defending me, I'll have to live with that for eternity. Please, don't make me carry another ghost. Alara saw the desperation in his eyes, the centuries of loss written in every line of his face. She touched his cheek, feeling the cold skin that never warmed. I promise, she whispered. But only if you promise to survive too. He pulled her into an embrace, sudden and fierce. She felt his face pressed against her hair, his chest still against her own pounding heart. I've survived for 100 years, he murmured. I can survive one more night. Then he released her and they returned to their preparations. Alara hung the iron chains, while Seelan gathered weapons, swords from his past. Iron-tipped arrows, torches soaked in oil. The manor transformed from a sanctuary into a battleground. When the sun finally set, they stood together in the grand hall. 7 vampires emerged from the forest. Alara watched from the window as they approached the gate. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who'd never known defeat. The leader was tall, with silver hair and eyes like cold fire. He wore the insignia of House Corvin, a raven clutching a bleeding heart. Seelan of Nightborn, the leader called, his voice carrying easily across the grounds. We come under the old laws. You have taken blood from our house. The debt must be paid. Seelan stepped out onto the manor's front steps. Your hunters attacked first, Varek. I acted in defense of my territory. Territory you stole when you abandoned your house, Varek replied. You have no claim here. No protection under the night courts. You're a rogue, Nightborn. And rogues have no rights. I have the right to defend what's mine. The girl? Varek smiled, showing too many teeth. Is that what this is about? You've grown attached to your pet? Alara saw Seelan's hands clench. She's under my protection. Then surrender her, and we'll consider your debt paid. No, Varek's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. The vampires attacked. They moved as one, a coordinated assault on 3 fronts. 2 went for the main entrance, 3 circled toward the western wall, and 2 including Varek disappeared into shadow, hunting for another way in. Seelan met the frontal assault with brutal efficiency. His sword flashed in the moonlight, centuries of skill evident in every movement. He was faster than them, more experienced, and fighting with the desperate strength of someone protecting something irreplaceable. But he was still 1 against 7. Alara heard glass shatter in the west wing. They'd found a window. She grabbed a torch and ran toward the sound, her pulse thundering in her ears. A male vampire climbed through the broken window, his hands blistered from the iron chains. He saw her and smiled. There you are, little songbird. Alara threw the torch. It struck him in the chest, and his shirt caught fire immediately. He shrieked and fell backward through the window, disappearing into the darkness. But another was already coming through. This one was female, lean and quick, with scars across her face. She dodged the second torch Alara threw and landed in a crouch, her red eyes fixed on Alara like a cat watching a mouse. Clever, the vampire said, but not clever enough. She lunged. Alara dove aside, grabbed the iron chain from the window frame, and swung it like a whip. It caught the vampire across the face, burning a line across her cheek. The vampire hissed and recoiled. Iron and fire, the vampire spat. He's been teaching you. He's been teaching me to survive people like you. Alara shot back. The vampire laughed. People like me? Child, I'm 300 years old. I've hunted humans across continents. I've drunk from kings and beggars alike. What makes you think you're any different? Because I have something you don't, Alara said, backing toward the hallway. What's that? Something to lose. The vampire attacked again, but Alara was ready. She'd led her into the hallway deliberately toward the eastern windows where dawn would eventually break. She grabbed another drape and tore it down, letting moonlight flood the corridor. Not enough to hurt, but enough to make the vampire cautious. You can't hold out forever, the vampire taunted. The sun won't rise for hours. And we have all night. Alara's mind raced. The vampire was right. She couldn't fight indefinitely. But she didn't need to win, she just needed to buy time. Seelan, she shouted. His response came immediately, a roar of fury from somewhere in the manor. Then footsteps, impossibly fast, and suddenly he was there, appearing between Alara and the scarred vampire. Touch her, he said quietly, and I'll make your death last centuries. The vampire sneered. Bold words for a rogue with no house. I don't need a house, Seelan replied. I just need rage. He moved. The fight was savage, brutal, faster than Alara's eyes could follow. They crashed through walls, shattered furniture, left gouges in the stone floor. The vampire was skilled, but Seelan fought like something unleashed all fury and precision. Then Varek's voice echoed through the manor. Enough. Everyone froze. The silver-haired leader stood in the grand hall, and he held something that made Alara's blood run cold, a small vial filled with dark red liquid. Blood. Do you know what this is, Nightborn? Varek asked softly. Seelan's expression went blank with horror. No, oh, yes. Blood from the line of Morgaine herself. A drop of this, and every vampire who ever served House Nightborn will know exactly where you are. Every enemy you made. Every rival you fled from. Every vampire who wants revenge for the old wars. He held up the vial like a prize. Surrender the girl, or I break this vial and summon every monster from your past. Alara saw Seelan's face, the calculation, the fear, the impossible choice. She stepped forward before he could speak. I'll go with you, she said. Alara. No, on one condition, she continued, ignoring Seelan's protest. You let him live. You leave this place and never return. The debt is paid with me. Varek smiled. Acceptable. No. Seelan grabbed her arm. You don't understand what they'll do. I understand perfectly, Alara said, meeting his eyes. But I won't let you face your entire past because of me. I'd rather face them all than lose you, he said desperately. She touched his face one last time. Then you'll have to come find me. Chapter 9. Blood oaths and broken chains. No, Seelan's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He stood between Alara and Varek, his body a wall of fury and desperation. His eyes had gone completely black, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries. You want a blood oath, Corvin? Fine, I'll give you one. Varek's smile faltered. What are you talking about? The old laws, Seelan said, his words precise and formal. I invoke the right of challenge. Single combat. Winner takes all, the girl, the territory, the debt. Loser submits to the victor's judgment. A ripple of shock went through the assembled vampires. Even the scarred female stopped advancing. You can't be serious, Varek said. The right of challenge hasn't been invoked in over a century. The night courts barely recognize the courts may be gone, but the laws remain, Seelan interrupted. Or does House Corvin no longer honor the old ways? Have you become so weak that you need 6 vampires to take down one rogue? Varek's eyes flashed with fury. The insult had struck home. You dare question Corvin's honor? I question whether you have any left, Seelan replied coldly. A true hunter doesn't threaten hostages, doesn't use ancient blood to summon reinforcements. A true hunter faces his prey alone. Silence stretched through the manor, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Varek laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Very well, Nightborn. You want to die with honor? I'll grant you that mercy. He handed the vial to one of his companions and stepped forward, drawing a blade from his coat. Single combat. To the final death. And when I win, I'll take the girl anyway, and leave your ashes for the crows. If you win, Seelan corrected. They moved to the center of the hall, clearing space. The other vampires formed a circle, their faces eager. This was old entertainment, the kind they'd been raised on in the night court's ritualized violence. Power made manifest, the strong consuming the weak. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Seelan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on Varek. This is the only way to end it. Trust me. I do trust you, she whispered. That's what terrifies me. Something softened in his expression. Then he stepped into the circle. The fight began without ceremony. Varek struck first, his blade flashing toward Seelan's throat. Seelan deflected, countered, spun away. They were evenly matched in speed, but Varek had the advantage of numbers. His house stood watching, ready to intervene if their leader fell. Seelan had only Alara. The blades rang against each other, filling the hall with the song of steel. They moved like dancers, like warriors, like creatures born for this. Blood sprayed both of them, wounded now, healing almost as fast as they were cut. But Alara noticed something the other vampires didn't. Seelan was slowing down, not much, just fractionally. Each movement took a half-second longer. Each dodge was narrower than the last. He was weakening, because he hadn't fed properly in over a week, because he'd been starving himself, because the few drops of her blood hadn't been enough to sustain him through this. Varek noticed too. His smile widened. Getting tired, Nightborn? Missing your glory days when you had a house to back you? When you had Morgan's blood to strengthen you? Seelan didn't waste breath on a response. But Alara saw the truth in the tightness of his shoulders, the slight tremor in his sword arm. He was going to lose, and if he lost, they would both die. No, worse than die. They would be separated, and she would be taken to whatever hellhouse Corvin had planned for her, and Seelan would be left with another ghost to carry through eternity. Alara's mind raced. The iron chains, the fire, the dawn that was still hours away. None of it would help now. The other vampires would kill her the moment she interfered, unless she gave them a reason not to. Her eyes fell on the vial of blood, held by the vampire standing nearest to her. Ancient blood. Morgan's blood. The kind that called to others. The kind that created bonds. An insane idea bloomed in her mind. Before she could second-guess herself, Alara lunged forward and grabbed the vial from the vampire's hand. The creature hissed and reached for her, but she was already moving, running toward the circle. Stop the fight, she shouted. Both combatants froze. Every vampire in the hall turned to stare at her. What are you doing? Seelan demanded. Alara held up the vial. New terms. If Seelan wins, you leave and never return. But if Varrock wins, she met Seelan's eyes. If Varrock wins, I'll drink this blood and summon every vampire from your past myself. I'll make sure your entire history knows exactly where to find you. Horror dawned on Seelan's face. Alara, no human blood mixed with Morgan's essence. Alara continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I don't know what that would do, but I imagine it would be very, very loud, in the way vampires hear these things. Varrock studied her with new interest. You'd doom him to save him? I'd raise the stakes high enough that you'd actually try to win fairly, Alara replied. Right now, you're playing with him. You have 6 vampires ready to intervene the moment things go badly. But if I'm holding this vial, if I'm one broken seal away from calling down every enemy he's ever made, you can't afford to cheat. You have to actually beat him. A slow, appreciative smile spread across Varrock's face. You're cleverer than I gave you credit for, little songbird. Do we have new terms or not? Varrock looked at his companions, then back at Seelan. What do you say, Nightborn? Do you accept your pet's bargain? Seelan's expression was anguished. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Alara said softly. I'm giving you a reason to win. For a long moment, their eyes held. Then Seelan turned to Varrock. I accept. The fight resumed, but everything had changed. Varrock fought in earnest now, no longer toying with his opponent. And Seelan fought like a man who had everything to lose, which Alara realized. He did. She clutched the vial in her shaking hands and watched the 2 vampires tear each other apart. Blood stained the stone floor. Furniture shattered under the impact of their bodies. The other vampires watched in tense silence, understanding that the balance had shifted. This was no longer a game. This was survival. Varrock drove Seelan back against the wall, his blade at Seelan's throat. Any last words, Nightborn? Seelan smiled, blood on his teeth. Just one. Duck. Varrock frowned. What? Alara threw the candelabra. It flew over Seelan's head and struck Varrock directly in the face. The vampire stumbled backward, and Seelan moved. One thrust. Clean. Precise. Through the heart. Varrock looked down at the blade protruding from his chest. Then at Seelan. Then at Alara. Clever girl, he whispered. Then he turned to Ash. Chapter 10. The choice between worlds. The silence that followed Varrock's death was absolute. 6 vampires stood frozen in the hall, staring at the pile of ash that had been their leader. Seelan remained in the center of the circle, his sword still extended, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. Then as one, the remaining vampires knelt. The challenge is complete, the scarred female said, her voice formal. House Corvin recognizes Seelan of Nightborn as victor. The debt is satisfied. The territory is claimed. Alara's legs nearly gave out with relief. She still clutched the vial, her knuckles white. Seelan lowered his sword slowly. Leave, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Take Varrock's ashes and go. Tell your house that Blackthorn Manor is forbidden ground. Any vampire who crosses my gates will meet the same fate. The vampires rose as one and moved toward the door. The scarred female paused at the threshold, looking back at Alara. You fought well, human. For what it's worth, she smiled, showing fangs. Perhaps you'll survive him after all. Then they were gone, melting into the pre-dawn darkness. The moment the door closed, Seelan collapsed. Alara dropped the vial and ran to him, catching him before he hit the floor. He was heavier than she expected, dead weight in her arms. His wounds were healing, but slowly. You're weak, she said, her voice breaking. You need blood. I'll survive, he murmured, but his eyes were unfocused. No, you won't. Not like this. She shifted his weight, cradling his head against her shoulder. Seelin, please. Let me help you. Too dangerous. The bond? I don't care about the bond, Alara interrupted fiercely. I care about you living through the night. That's all that matters right now. His hand came up weakly to cup her face. You're going to regret this. Probably. She smiled through her tears. But I'm getting used to making reckless decisions where you're concerned. She pulled the bandage from her hand, reopening the half-healed cut from before. Blood welled immediately, and she pressed her palm to his mouth. Drink, she commanded. For a heartbeat, he resisted. Then instinct took over. His lips closed around her palm, and this time there was no gentleness. He drank deeply, desperately, his body shuddering with each pull. Alara felt it, the strange, intimate sensation of her life flowing into him, warming something that had been cold for centuries, and she felt something else, a thread, gossamer thin, stretching between them, a connection that hummed with shared sensation. She felt his relief, his guilt, his desperate hunger, not just for blood, but for connection, for warmth, for her. And he felt her too, her fear and courage tangled together, her stubborn determination. The way her heart raced, not just from blood loss, but from something deeper. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were clear again, bright, almost silver in the candlelight. You feel it, he whispered. It wasn't a question. Yes, Alara breathed. The bond. It's formed. I can feel your heartbeat like it's my own. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely complete, as if something that had been missing had finally clicked into place. I don't regret it, she said. Seelin sat up slowly, pulling her into his arms. They stayed there on the blood-stained floor, holding each other as the first pale light of dawn crept through the eastern windows. They'll come back eventually, he said against her hair. Not Corvin, they'll honor the challenge. But word will spread. Other houses will hear that I'm no longer hiding. That I've claimed territory again. That I've formed a bond with a human. Let them come, Alara said. We'll face them together. That's not a life, Alara. That's an eternal siege. She pulled back to look at him. Then what do you suggest? His expression was tortured. I can break the bond. It's new enough that it wouldn't hurt you permanently. You could leave. Go to Ashford. Or farther. Change your name. Start over. Live the human life you deserve. Without you. Yes. No, she said firmly. Alara, no, she repeated. I didn't survive Thomas destroying my reputation. My family abandoning me. 3 vampire attacks. And a blood oath challenge. Just to walk away from the first person who's made me feel alive in years. She took his face in both hands. I'm not leaving you, Seelin. I'm not another ghost for you to carry. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Even knowing what it means. The danger, the isolation, the even knowing all of it, she interrupted. But I need you to choose too. Not out of guilt or duty or the need to protect me. I need you to choose this because you want it. Because you want me. Seelin stared at her, centuries of loneliness and fear warring with the fragile hope in his eyes. I've wanted you since the moment you knocked on my door, he confessed. Since you looked at me without fear. Since you stood beside me in the corridor and said you understood loneliness. Since you threw yourself into danger to save me, over and over, when the smart thing would have been to run. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But wanting you and keeping you safe are different things. Then stop trying to keep me safe, Alara said, and start letting me stand beside you. As an equal. As a partner. You're mortal, for now. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Seelin's eyes widened. Alara, you can't mean I don't know what I mean yet, she admitted. I'm not ready to make that choice. Maybe I never will be. But I need you to know that I'm not afraid of forever. If it's with you. I'm only afraid of losing you. He kissed her, then gentle at first, then deeper, with 400 years of loneliness breaking against the shore of her warmth. She tasted blood on his lips, felt the cold of his skin, and didn't care. This was real. This was choice. This was theirs. When they finally broke apart, the sun had risen fully. Golden light streamed through the windows. And Seelin pulled back into the shadows reflexively, but Alara followed him. The manor will need repairs, she said, looking at the shattered furniture, the blood-stained floors. And we'll need better defenses if more houses come. We? Seelin asked softly. We, Alara confirmed. You said Blackthorn stopped being a home when you stopped pretending to be human. Maybe it's time to make it a home again. For both of us, a human and a vampire, living together in a fortress full of ghosts, Celine mused. The houses will think I've gone mad. Alara smiled. Let them. Epilogue. 6 months later, gardens of Blackthorn Manor bloomed for the first time in 70 years. Alara knelt among the roses, her hands dark with soil, the afternoon sun warm on her shoulders. Behind her, the manor stood solid and proud, its windows no longer shuttered, its halls no longer silent. She'd hired workers from Ashford to make repairs, humans who asked no questions when paid well. The grand hall had been restored, the library organized, the conservatory filled with plants that bloomed day and night, and in the evenings, when the sun set and Celine emerged from his chambers, they walked the grounds together. They talked, they planned, they built something neither had imagined possible. A life. The bond between them had deepened, becoming as natural as breathing. She felt him always a quiet presence at the edge of her awareness, steady and sure. And he felt her, grounding him to the world in ways he'd forgotten possible. Other vampires had come, testing the borders. But word of Varek's defeat had spread, and none had been foolish enough to challenge Celine directly. Blackthorn Manor had become something new in the vampire world, neutral ground, protected territory. A place where the old rules still held meaning. Alara heard footsteps behind her and smiled. You're up early, she said, without turning. I wanted to see the sunset, Celine replied, moving to stand beside her in the lengthening shadows. And you? She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and looked up at him. 6 months, and he still took her breath away. The roses are blooming, she said, because you gave them a reason to, he replied, pulling her close. Maybe we all needed a reason, Alara murmured against his chest. They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon. Two souls who'd found each other in the dark and chosen to build something beautiful from broken pieces. The night was coming, but they would face it together.